Like, you ever think like what goes on? Like the human brain. Like let's foreground this. Let's ground this whole segment. The human brain capable of so much wonder, so much power, so much thought, so much intelligence, and yet we have people like this. So this is Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks. I don't even know how to preface this one, but this is really, truly fascinating. Let's watch.
So when you love something so much, you almost want to do anything to defend it, to preserve it, to enhance it, like you would for your family. And for so many people at Starbucks, this has become their family. And how personal it is. And it is very personal, especially when you have an adversary that's threatening the very essence of what you believe to be true.
Okay, so first of all, we got to remind ourselves, Starbucks uses slave labor overseas to harvest its coffee beans and other such. They literally employ slaves. Like we need to talk about this, right? Oh, slavery. Remember that thing in the history books? No, actually, Starbucks pays slave encampments, right, to employ slaves and also children. So Starbucks gets its coffee from child laborers and slaves, right? So that's important to understand. Second of all, but that's the essence of his being, right? Like the essence of what he believes to be true is being threatened because workers want to unionize. Why does he find unionization so scary? Well, because he doesn't like the idea of workers having rights. That's why he employs slaves in other countries to harvest coffee. That's why he employs children, people that don't have rights in other countries, right? So he is very upset by the idea, right, that anyone that would possibly ever work for him would actually, say, hey, I'm a human being and I deserve to be treated well. To him, that's, again, against the very essence of his being, right? Like the billions of cells that orchestrate the fucking, like, biomass known as Howard Schultz, right? All of them are working together to make sure that as many people are enslaved as possible. And the fact that anyone would have any sort of liberatory struggle in regards to his company, to him, it puts him on suicide watch. Like, this shit's crazy. So let's keep going.
And so I want to ask you to understand what it means to take it personally and do everything we can collectively and individually to protect, preserve, and enhance the company. And I know that from a strategy standpoint and from an investment standpoint, we're going to do all the things the right way.
So I just want to be very clear, right? Like, Starbucks is spending millions and millions and millions of dollars in union busting and maintaining slavery in as much as its supply chain as possible. And so, but think about this, right? Think about how resources work. Like, in their world, spending $10 million on giving their workers, a raise, spending $10 million on maybe, I don't know, paying the slaves who harvest the coffee beans, right? No. I'm going to spend $10 million on lawyers, right, to try to make sure that my workers get less money. I'm going to give money not to the people that I employ that make my company even exist. No. Fuck them. I'm going to give all of my money to a bunch of lawyers to keep them down, hopefully get them fired, and make sure that they can't get anything at all to survive. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
But all of that doesn't matter if the execution doesn't measure up to the quality of the coffee.
What? I don't even, okay, so the other aspect of this that's really strange is he's talking about unions as an outside adversary? Like, what? Like, what is this language? Like, this guy thinks he's, like, some fucking, like, movie, like, character. Like, he's in a cartoon. What is that language? Like, what is that? There's an outside adversary, and they told me that we should abolish slavery, and I was thinking, no way, I love slavery. Like, an outside force said that I should pay my workers a little bit more than starvation wages. Well, if I can get my fucking way, I'd enslave them all. That's why I have half of my supply chain being produced by slaves, right? So, but this is crazy. Like, this guy is nuts. This is some, like, psychosis. This guy is, like, Mike Lindell tier, like, fucking psychopath. Like, let's be really honest here. Like, Mike Lindell, right, the guy that thinks the machines are haunted and the machines, like, fucking, like, are, like, stalking him in his sleep or whatever. Like, let me just play the fuck.
But it's a class action lawsuit against all machines and that they're defective devices.
So Mike Lindell, right? He's like the right-wing guy. Like, machines are like chasing him in his sleep, right? The fucking shadow machine people, right? And then you've got Howard Schultz, right? The outside forces. Remember the last time I covered this guy? He was talking about how, like, our entire family is being assaulted. We're under assault by these outside forces of evil. These adversarial forces of evil that just sold me that they don't want to have slavery involved in Starbucks' supply chain anymore. No! Right, like, what the fuck? Like, what is this guy talking about? Like, again, like, this guy is a psychopath. He has a mental illness of some kind. And that's the thing you really need to understand, right? In order to get to the position that Howard Schultz is in right now at this moment, again, his company is built off of the back of slave labor. His company is built off the back of child labor, right? That is one of the massive ways that they make a profit at all, is they employ slavery to acquire their product, right? So, and again, a lot of other companies do this too, right? Like Nestle, for example, employs slave labor to get their cocoa beans and so forth, right? So this is not like a very rare practice, right? Slavery never ended. Slavery will always probably exist as long as billionaires exist, because without slaves, we could have no such thing as billionaires. That's just how it is, right? But anyway, but this guy, like, I really need people to understand, billionaires are not human beings, right? They are like, it's like, cancer, how cancer works, right? Like, so it's your cells basically continuing to divide and produce more cells, but without, they're going off script, right? Your liver cells are supposed to regenerate the liver. What if they just started generating a bunch of shit on the liver? That's called cancer, motherfucker. You got cancer, right? That's no longer a functioning apparatus of your organ, right? And so, but that's the situation. I want to make this analogy that's what billionaires have. They've got like some sort of brain cancer, but in like the mental sense, like in the mind sense, like I don't think they've got physical tumors, so they might. That could be a potential aggressor. Maybe that's the outside adversary he's talking about. But anyway, but what they do have is a cancer of the mind. Like, their brain does not know how to function properly anymore, right? Like, they are outside of all logic and reason. They have left the real world, right? They're in some fantasy realm of utter imagination, and like, that's what they live in. That's what they are in. Like, so when Howard Schultz is talking about how slaves wanting money makes them like evil or whatever, like, you have to understand, like, to him, slavery is a core part of his identity, right? Just like the motherfuckers in the goddamn 19th century that we fought a war over, slavery is a core aspect of his identity, right? He wants to put down the people that work for him as much as humanly possible, right? And unfortunately, in the United States, we've outlawed slavery, at least, theoretically speaking, right? I mean, look at the prison industrial complex, right? And that's why, again, as much of the supply chain as possible for a lot of these corporations, Starbucks, Nestle, and so forth, right? A lot of the supply chains, as much of them as possible, does employ slave labor overseas, child labor. Why? Because it's cheaper, right? Why do you think people outsource their jobs? Because it's cheaper. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about, like, national security. They don't care about supply chains. All they care about is control and power. And that's why, again, they could spend $30 million giving wage increases to every one of their employees, but instead they're spending $30 million on a failed union busting campaign. They're just wasting the money, setting it all on fire because it's not working, right? They're setting the money on fire instead of doing something good. If they did, now think about it this way as well, on the productivity angle, when workers are happier And when their wages increase, right, their productivity increases, their well-being increases, right? Slaves do not actually produce, they're not as productive as healthy individuals that have all of their needs taken care of, right? They're typically starved, they're typically taken advantage of, and as a result, their productivity decreases. So again, this is not about productivity. This is not about making the best coffee in the world, because if it was, you would be paying your workers more money. They would be doing a better job as a result. They would be happier as a result. They would be more productive as a result, but they're not doing that because, again, it's about power and control. That has nothing to do with quality of the product. It has nothing to do with quality of anything. It has nothing to do with making the best coffee in the world, right? It is about control and power. Billionaires are slave owners. Every single one of them. There are 0 billionaires that will ever exist and have ever existed that have not profited off of slave labor. Look at all of these corporations, right? Look at where do you think a lot of the raw materials gets, mined out for computers and technology, right? It gets mined out from these giant mines in Africa and South America that are often, employed by children and slaves, right? So again, all of these major industries, all of these big, billionaire bitches that control the world right now, all of them made their money off the backs of slavery, child labor, and forcing their workers in as many ways as possible to have the worst possible quality of life experience. Because again, they don't value, it's not about the money, right? It's not about the money. Like, if I got $1 billion, like, I'd be buying, like, Yu-Gi-Oh cards and, like, fucking, like, I'd be, like, buying food for my friends, and I'd be, like, buying video games and books, and fucking, maybe I'll build a new computer, right? These guys, they don't have $1 billion and actually spend it, because if they spent it, right, they would actually improve the economy, because they would be spending their money. What they do is they hoard their money, they stockpile it as much as possible. Why? Because again, if a billionaire is spending money on anything, right, that money is going to exchange hands, presumably into someone who's lower on the leaderboard of capitalism to them, right? So why do that when you can hoard as much money as you can? And that's the problem. These people just hoard and hoard and hoard and hoard. They steal and steal and leech and suck and suck and suck the rest of this fucking species dry. And again, it's insane. It's crazy. They live in a fantasy world, but what are we going to do about it? That's what I'm left wondering. So, we have literal slavers running this country and running the world. Billionaire, slave-owning jackasses, right? Spending all of their money, again, on lawyers and these firms that really, in the end, just, like, support them and make the money go back to them anyway. So, if you spend $30 million on lawyers, right, but they're, like, your personal lawyers, right, that's going to pay dividends and you're going to make that money back in other ways, right? So, again, it's not even really spending money. It's more of an investment. Anytime billionaires spend any money whatsoever, what they're doing is investing in their money. That's why, again, with this Elon Musk bullshit, right, like Elon Musk, he didn't spend $44 billion on Twitter. He did not use $44 billion on Twitter. He did not buy Twitter for $44 billion. What he did was he put his money in a significantly, distorted and with heavy interest bank account, essentially known as Twitter, right? The stock prices are going up. The stock market right now is fucking garbage. But guess what? Twitter is one of the stocks that's performing, is outperforming a lot of the market. I think I checked yesterday and Twitter was outperforming the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones and other stuff, right? So again, we need to really understand what language is. Again, Elon Musk is not buying Twitter for $44 billion. He is not giving the people of Twitter $44 billion and then not having it anymore, right? He is investing $44 billion in something that will only gain value, right? So again, he is not buying Twitter for $44 billion. What he is doing is he's probably buying another $20 billion with $44 billion. That would be another way to put it. Or if you want to say it, more specifically, he's buying $60 billion with $44 billion. And that's exactly how this economy works, right? They just slosh their money around and fucking give it to each other and back and forth, and then inflate the currency, and then fuck over the fucking lower class. Anything that they can to reduce the lower class into nothing. And all of these billionaires have the same agenda, and they treat us in the same fucking way, every single one of them. So fuck them all straight to hell. Also, again, well, there's the rest of the things I would like to say, not allowed to say on YouTube. So we'll end it there.